Matteo Messina Denaro was a ruthless playboy, a charming mafioso, one of the world's most sought fugitives, and according to some sources, the last remaining Sicilian mob boss, a position he held for over 30 years until he was eventually caught. Despite being a notorious killer, Matteo was famous for his luxurious lifestyle and ruthless nature. That's why in today's video, we're going to take a look inside the life of Italy's most wanted mob boss, Matteo Messina Denaro, aka Diabolique, the unchallenged boss of all bosses within the Mafia. Matteo Messina Denaro was born in the small town of Castelvetrano in Trapani, Sicily, and he was born into the family of Don Ciccio, the capo mondamento of the entire province. His father, Francesco Messina Denaro, started his career in organized crime as an armed guard for the Dialli family before climbing his way up to a leadership position in the Trapani Mafia. The family he worked for were affluent landowners and among the founders of Banco Sicula, but it only lasted for a short while. As he continued to grow in ranks, Francesco became an overseer of the family's land holdings and was handed a significant size of the estate in Castelvetrano. By the age of 14, Matteo had already learned how to use a gun, and soon he went on to commit his first of many killings. 4 years down the line, 18-year-old Matteo had become the capo mandamento of his town and neighboring cities, just like his father. When the older Denaro died in 1998, the young boss took charge of his domain, expanded his influence, and thus began his criminal reign of terror. After the arrest of Vincenzo Verga, who ruled over Trapani and its environs, Matteo became the don of the entire province. He was commanding some 900 men and apparently reorganized the 20 mafia families in Trapani into one single mandamento loyal only to him. As a major player in the world of organized crime, Matteo got his money from an extensive extortion scheme that forced local businesses to pay pizzo or protection money. He also skimmed from public construction contracts and was very active in the international drug trade. At this time, it was common knowledge to the right people that the new boss was involved with the Contrera Caruana clan and was already attracting the attention of the FBI. Away from his illegal dealings, Matteo made money legally by owning stakes in a chain of Sicilian supermarkets and a vast olive grove. With all the money pouring into Matteo Denaro's pockets, it's no wonder the media developed an interest in him. In the papers, magazines, and on television, Matteo is often portrayed as a playboy mafioso and womanizer. He drove around in an expensive Porsche sports car and wore expensive Rolex watches, Ray-Ban sunglasses, and fancy clothes from Giorgio Armani and Versace. As Matteo rose to prominence, the journal Espresso featured him on the cover, with headlines proclaiming him the new mafia boss. He became a permanent fixture on the FBI's most wanted list in 1993, and even Forbes magazine named him one of the world's top 10 criminals. After managing to evade the authorities time and time again, Matteo earned his famous nickname Diabolique. The name was inspired by an Italian comic book villain who always managed to get away from the police despite his violence and links to terrorist acts. Following the deaths of Bernardo Provenzano in 2016 and Salvatore Rina in 2017, Don Diabolique became widely regarded as the undisputed head of the mafia bosses. He had contacts with the Colombian drug cartels, had networks reaching as far as Belgium and Germany, and had strong links with other powerful mafia families in Palermo. In line with his infamous persona, Matteo Messina Denaro committed several diabolical crimes during his reign of terror. For starters, he was said to be behind the 1992 killing of anti-mafia prosecutors Giovanni Falcone and Paolo Borsellino. Contrary to what many believe, the authorities were not the only ones who got to see Matteo's diabolical side. In fact, he was even more ruthless when dealing with other members of the mafia and their loved ones. Matteo is said to have killed Antonella Bonanno, the pregnant girlfriend of a rival mafia boss. He's also said to be behind the kidnapping and eventual killing of Giuseppe Di Matteo, the 11-year-old son of a mafioso turned state witness. The little boy was held in captivity for 2 years before being killed, and then his body was dissolved in acid to prevent his grieving family from burying him. Away from singular acts of violence, Matteo was also responsible for the 1993 bomb attacks in Milan, Florence, and Rome, which killed 10 people. The bomb attacks led to an implementation of a stricter prison regime, and it in turn started the infamous terrorist campaign by the Mafia families. Matteo played a key role in the incident among the Mafia bosses like Giovanni Brusca, Leoluca Bagarella, Antonino Gioi, and the rest, who gathered frequently in the Santa Flavia district of Bulgaria on an estate owned by mafioso Leonardo Greco. He, along with the other members of the group, devised a plan to push the Italian government to retreat, and this resulted in a series of bombings in Florence, killing a lot of people and also causing damage to cultural landmarks. The plan to force the hand of the Italian government succeeded, but at what cost? Matteo had to go into hiding after the massive bombing sent everyone into a frenzy, and investigators believed he spent the next 3 years, until 1996, somewhere between Aspra and Bulgaria with his girlfriend, Maria Messi. Matteo's girlfriend, Maria Messi, was later arrested in the year 2000 after police discovered the love letters she had written to Matteo. She was sentenced to 3 years in prison, along with her brother Francesco, for aiding and abetting a criminal. Matteo was condemned to life in prison only 2 years later, on May 6, 2002, for his role in the 1993 bombings. But it was a sentence in absentia. By this time, the Mafia boss was a ghost in the wind to local and federal authorities. For 30 years, investigators could only rely on a facial composite and short snippets of voice recordings to identify the Don. He, on the other hand, was forced to live extremely cautiously and had to calculate every move to perfection. Over the years, smokescreen protection formed around Messina Denaro, made up of a network of people loyal to him. As the years passed, with the cops no closer to catching the Mafia leader, they began to crack down on anyone suspected of protecting or aiding Messina Denaro. To apprehend the Don, the Italian police adopted the new strategy of detaining dozens of his known associates and seizing millions of euros in assets. On November 18, 2008, the Italian authorities seized 700 million euros in assets linked to Matteo from Giuseppe Gregoli, who was Sicily's store king. They also seized 12 businesses, 220 real estate holdings, including villas, apartment towers, and 133 land holdings totaling 60 hectares. Refusing to be deterred, authorities found and confiscated documents and records linking Gregoli to Matteo. At that time, Matteo was believed to be hiding near his family's home in Castelvetrano and traveling between safe houses, but the authorities could not catch wind of him. In January 2010, the police, who had still not given up on the search, seized about 550 million euros worth of construction businesses, houses, shops, and vehicles from Rosario Cascio, a Western Sicilian construction magnate suspected of being one of Matteo's key bankrollers and money launderers. Together with assets acquired from Giuseppe Gregoli, the total value of the assets confiscated was north of $1 billion, serving as a stark reminder of the wealth and power of Diabolik's criminal empire. By September 2010, the authorities had seized another 1.5 billion euros in assets from Vito Nicastri, a Sicilian billionaire suspected of cooperating with Matteo. It was believed that his investments in wind and solar energy sources were a means of laundering money for Matteo. Although the circle around Matteo tightened even more after all these, his network gradually weakened, making him vulnerable. The smokescreen that protected him all these years began to clear. More than 100 people were soon arrested, including Denaro's siblings, and more businesses worth over 150 million euros were seized. Things got worse for the Bane of Sicily as the police came in full force with an operation called Operation Golem 2. As one of the major action points of the operation, Matteo's brother Salvatore was arrested together with 18 others on March 15, 2010. All of them were members of Matteo's closest protective network. Before they were apprehended, they were tasked with handling Matteo's secret correspondence and keeping him out of the eyes of the law. The courts convicted all of them with mafia ties, corruption, and protection rackets, and then the authorities continued the search for Italy's most wanted. In the search for Matteo, about 200 Italian police officers executed search warrants at residences controlled by around 30 Italian mafiosi in and around Castelvetrano, his hometown. Despite their best effort, the world's most wanted boss of the Cosa Nostra group managed to elude capture for nearly 3 decades. One of the things that stood out the most about Matteo Messina Denaro was that he had a very proactive criminal mind. This was made quite clear by the fact that despite living a lavish lifestyle and being linked to an unending list of crimes, he managed to evade arrest. Denaro saw himself as a philosopher and folk hero, and there were reports that he underwent facial repair surgery. During his time on the run, he was still living the high life, financed by unscrupulous politicians and businesses. When the chase finally came to an end, the boss of all bosses was found in the center of a busy city, in a hardly hidden spot. After 30 years of searching, he finally fell into the hands of the law. But what had finally led the police to him? After the crackdown on the Don's relatives and associates, their homes remained wiretapped. They might have been aware that their conversations were being monitored, and so they discussed issues vaguely, trying not to give too much away. One of the topics that kept coming up in conversation was cancer, and this was enough to give the authorities a clue. These intercepts, combined with more monitoring of their Google searches on Crohn's disease and liver cancer, led the Carabinieri to assume that the Mafia boss was seeking treatment. They figured that he was receiving treatment under the false name of Andrea Bonafidi, the nephew of deceased Mafia boss Leonardo Bonafidi. The Don was apprehended when he made an appointment with the false name at a clinic. When a policeman approached him and asked him his name, he did not lie. He merely looked up and said, "You know who I am. I am Matteo Messina Denaro." The moment had come. The authorities had finally caught Diabolique. Matteo Messina Denaro, aka the Diabolique, was the last godfather of the most ferocious generation of mafiosi. He once boasted that he could fill a cemetery with his victims, and he was a man who kept to his word. His life was filled with violence, power struggles, and vicious plots. By the time he was caught, he had become the symbol of the Italian mafia's resilience.